Hi, and welcome back. This is part 3 of our series on something's missing at the Seder, and that something is the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, Paschal offering. We found the Korban Pesach sort of hiding in the Manishtana, where the first 2 questions of the Manishtana are best understood by understanding that they were originally about the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, Paschal offering. We also, on the Seder plate, we have a hint to the Paschal Lamb. There's a remembrance of the Paschal offering, and that's the shank bone on our Seder plates. We're going to take a look now at another place where the Korban Pesach is hiding, and that is the Afikoman. So the Mishnah tells us, maftir and achar Pesach Afikoman, that we do not have a maftir after eating the Korban Pesach. We don't have a maftir of Afikoman. So what does maftir mean? So maftir is a word you might be familiar with from synagogue. Maftir is the final portion. So we don't have a final portion after eating the Korban Pesach. We don't have an Afikoman. Afikoman was the Greek word for dessert. So we don't eat dessert after the Korban Pesach. Now, nowadays we don't have the Korban Pesach, but back then the Korban Pesach was the last thing that you would eat, just like our Afikoman. The matzah is the last thing that you eat. The matzah is the Afikoman, so too the Korban Pesach. And the reason why you don't have dessert after the Korban Pesach, or in our case after the Afikoman, is that you want the flavor of the Korban Pesach to remain in your mouth the entire evening. So listen, if matzah is your Afikoman, that's not really going to happen anyway. By the time you have your next cup of wine, chances are you're not tasting the matzah anymore. But at the time of the Korban Pesach, if the last thing you ate was some lamb, so you know how the lamb flavor, delicious, it sticks to your mouth, so the lamb flavor would still be there. So that's why maftir and achar Pesach Afikoman. That's really what we call Afikoman, the eating of the matzah at the end of the Seder. That's really a replacement for the Korban Pesach. And that would be the spot in the meal where the Korban Pesach would be eaten, by the way, because the Korban Pesach was eaten after the entire meal. It was eaten al hasova, it was eaten while you were full. So first you would have your meal, and then you would have your Korban Pesach. Now the meal ideally would consist of meat from a Korban Chagiga, from a different different holiday offering, which is offered up on any pilgrimage festival. And that is represented on our Seder plate. Another missing item, if you will, from our Seder is this Korban Chagiga, the sacrifice that was made for the holiday. That's represented on our Seder plates by the egg. Many people have a custom to eat the egg before they eat the meal. Okay? Different question of customs in your family. But again, the idea there being that that is representative of what the meal would have been. So the sequence would have been at the time of the Korban Pesach, when we were still offering up a Korban Pesach, the sequence would have been to tell over the story, eat the eat the meal, and then while saying Hallel, you would then eat the Korban Pesach. Nowadays, obviously, we have a very different sequence. Some other references to the Korban Pesach we have are in some of the songs at the end of our Seder. Now these songs, by the way, are all later additions, starting in the, if I remember correctly, somewhere in the 11th or 12th century, possibly later, the songs at the end were added on. Some of them were songs that were sung all year, and some printer decided to put them into the Haggadah later on, obviously after the printing press, started to put it into the Haggadah later on, and that's how these songs really worked their way into the Haggadah. However, there is in these songs, there are references to the Korban Pesach, in particular the song of Uvechein v'amartem zevach Pesach is referring back to the Korban Pesach. Also, if you take a look at Nirtzah, the introduction to the last section called Nirtzah, ended as the Passover Seder according to custom, statute, and laws. We were worthy to celebrate it this year, so may we perform it in future years. So in this year, Kasher Zochinu l'Sadero, so in this year where we had the merit of making it into part of our Seder, Kein Nizke la'asoso, we should also merit to be able to perform the Korban Pesach, perform the sacrificial service of Pesach night, which is really the star of the show It's really what Pesach is much about Pesach as telling over the story is, and eating the matzahs, the eating of the Korban Pesach. We should nizke la'asoso, we should be zocha, we should merit to be able to perform this central ritual of Judaism speedily and in our days, which is why immediately after that we say L'shana haba b'Yushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. It is at this point that we are done mentioning the Korban Pesach. Doesn't get mentioned again, although Chad Gadya may be the one little goat may be some sort of a reference, but nobody's really sure exactly what Chad Gadya is about. Sure is fun to sing it though. So that's the story with the Korban Pesach, with our missing guest at the Seder, and I'm just trying to think. Let me share with you one other thought going into our Seder, which I think is particularly relevant. And I'm going to talk about this more tomorrow in my address. But we have a phrase in our Haggadah, which is a very interesting one, and which I'd like to just add on here a quick reference to. And that is that b'chol dor v'dor, in every generation we're told that a person must envision themselves as if they went out from Egypt. So that's a very challenging thing to do, although, as I'll talk about tomorrow, we might have a little bit of a modern flavor for it. But it's interesting to note that the text in Maimonides about this is b'chol dor v'dor chayev adam laharos es atzmo, to make himself appear as if he went out from Egypt. This is based on the text in the Jerusalem Talmud. So a person should make themselves appear as if they went out from Egypt. So if you've ever had the opportunity, as we have fortunately, to spend a Seder, a Sephardic Seder, what you'll see them do at this point is they'll get up and they'll put on their shoulders, like the Torah said, they put their bread on their shoulders, their loaves on their shoulders. So they'll put matzah on their shoulder, and they'll be wearing walking shoes, and they'll parade around laharos es atzmam, to make themselves appear as if they went out from Egypt. Each of us has the challenge in our own lives to find a way to make the Seder relevant to us. And just like the absence of the Korban Pesach makes it challenging to make the Seder to us, there are many things that we can do that make the Seder more relevant to us. And one of those things is to imagine ourselves as if we went out from Egypt. One last thought to share with you before we go. Something interesting to consider is that the scope of what it is that we're thanking God for at the Seder is not only taking us out from slavery in Egypt. In fact, God is, at the same time, we are praising God for a much wider range of things. And that really becomes apparent in the Dayenu, which is really based upon, by the way, so we say the Dayenu, and then we say Alachas Kama V'Kama. How much more do we have to thank God for all of these things which God did for us? And then we list them. Actually, that list came first, and the Dayenu song came afterwards. The Dayenu song is very, very hard. It's a beautiful song. We love to sing it. But it does become challenging. It's worthwhile, if you want to have an interesting discussion at your Seder, how is it that if God took us out from Egypt, but for example, didn't kill the firstborn, or didn't split the sea, in which case we wouldn't have gotten away, or didn't feed us in the wilderness, how is it that that would have been enough? After all, if you stop the story at a much earlier point, you end up with a very disastrous story for the Jewish people. So it's worth thinking about how it is that those things would be enough. But the true answer is that the Dayenu song was built upon a list which is much more sequential, logical, makes perfect sense, and that's the list afterwards. That God brought us out from Egypt and executed judgment against them, did justice to their idols, slew their firstborn, gave us their property, divided the sea, brought us through dry shod, drowned our oppressors in it, helped us for 40 years in the desert, fed us man, gave us the Sabbath, brought us to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah, brought us to the land of Israel, and built the holy temple where we could atone from our sins. What's noteworthy about this list is that you would think that the Exodus from Egypt story ended when God split the sea for us and brought us through the sea. And yet we talk about the Exodus story continues with God taking care of us in the wilderness and giving us the Shabbos and giving us the Torah and bringing us to the land of Israel and building the Beis HaMikdash. That's because the Exodus story is not only about a redemption from Egypt. As significant as that historical event is, there's much more to the story. that historical event is a critical moment in a much larger process of, originally we were idol worshippers. God promised to Abraham that he would protect their descendants, and even though they'd be enslaved, he'd protect them. It really starts much earlier in history and continues on. The process of God freeing us from Egypt is the process of God moving us forward in going from idol worshippers to serving God properly. There's a much wider process that's going on. Without the exodus from Egypt, that process would have been halted. The process that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob began would have been halted. And therefore, that process which they began, we are remembering not only that they began the process, and not only that there was a redemption from Egypt, but that redemption was for the purpose of receiving the Torah and the purpose of entering the land of Israel and building the Beit HaMikdash and building the temple. May it be rebuilt speedily and in our days.